What happens when royal curiosity meets royal protocol? When the future queen consort finds herself face to face with an immovable force guarding the most sensitive documents in the kingdom. This is the untold story of a moment that revealed the hidden tensions within the British royal family. A story of power, protection, and the price of royal transparency. In the shadowed corridors of Buckingham Palace, where centuries of secrets sleep behind locked doors, one woman's determination to understand her husband's medical condition would spark a confrontation that no royal protocol manual had ever prepared for. The king's health records, sealed away like state secrets, became the center of a family drama that would test loyalties, challenge authority, and forever change how the royal family handles its most private matters. What started as a wife's concern for her husband's well-being transformed into a battle of wills between the established order and personal devotion. Behind palace walls, where every gesture is measured and every word carries weight, this true story unfolds with the intensity of a thriller and the emotional depth of a family saga. This is not just another royal story. This is the story of what happens when love collides with duty, when family bonds are tested by institutional rules, and when the most powerful people in Britain discover that some doors remain locked, even to them. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Buckingham Palace as Queen Consort Camilla made her way through corridors she had walked countless times before. Yet today felt different. The weight of concern pressed heavily on her shoulders as she thought about her husband's recent health struggles. King Charles had been experiencing episodes that concerned her deeply, moments where his usual sharp wit seemed clouded, instances where he appeared confused about details that should have been second nature to him. For weeks she had been asking questions. The royal physicians spoke in careful, measured tones about routine checkups and standard procedures. They used medical terminology that seemed designed more to obscure than to illuminate. Every inquiry she made was met with polite deflection, professional courtesy that felt increasingly like a wall being built around the information she desperately needed. The turning point had come 3 days earlier, during a private family dinner. Charles had momentarily forgotten the name of their longtime housekeeper, a woman who had served them for over 15 years. The look of confusion in his eyes lasted only seconds, but it was enough to send a chill through Camilla's heart. When she later asked Dr. Patterson, the royal physician, about these incidents, she was told they were simply signs of the natural aging process, nothing more concerning than typical senior moments. But Camilla knew her husband better than anyone. She had watched him command rooms full of world leaders, deliver complex speeches without notes, and recall intricate details about conversations from decades past. These recent lapses felt different, more significant than mere forgetfulness. The medical team's evasive responses only strengthened her resolve to find answers. The idea to access Charles's complete medical records had come to her gradually. As queen consort, she reasoned, surely she had the right to understand her husband's health situation fully. The royal medical team maintained detailed files on every member of the family. Comprehensive records that went back years and included specialist consultations, test results, and detailed observations that never made it into the sanitized summaries she typically received. Her research into the palace's administrative structure revealed that these sensitive medical files were stored in a special archive within the palace's lower levels. The Royal Medical Archive was a secure facility that housed not just current health records but historical medical documentation dating back generations. Access was strictly controlled, requiring special clearance that extended far beyond typical royal privileges. The archive itself was located in a section of the palace that most staff never saw. Behind a series of security doors and down a narrow staircase lay rooms that contained some of the most sensitive information in the kingdom. Medical records of monarchs, detailed accounts of royal health crises, and confidential correspondence with specialists from around the world were all carefully catalogued and stored in climate-controlled conditions. Camilla's first attempt to access the archive came through official channels. She requested a meeting with Sir Edmund Hartwell, the palace's chief medical administrator, a stern man in his late 60s who had served the royal family for over 3 decades. Sir Edmund received her in his office, a wood-paneled room filled with medical texts and official portraits of previous royal physicians. Her request was straightforward and seemed reasonable. As Charles's wife and closest companion, she wanted complete transparency about his medical condition. She explained her concerns about the recent episodes, her frustration with the vague updates she had been receiving, and her belief that she needed full information to properly support her husband's care. Sir Edmund listened with the practiced patience of someone accustomed to handling delicate royal requests. His response was polite but firm. The medical records, he explained, were subject to strict confidentiality protocols that existed to protect not just the current monarch, but the institution itself. Even as queen consort, her access was limited to information that the medical team deemed necessary for her to know. The conversation became increasingly tense as Camilla pressed for specifics. What exactly were these protocols? Who had established them? Under what circumstances could they be overridden? Sir Edmund's answers remained frustratingly vague, couched in references to long-standing traditions and institutional safeguards that seemed designed to prevent exactly the kind of inquiry she was making. When the official route proved fruitless, Camilla began to consider alternative approaches. She spent hours studying the palace's organizational charts, trying to understand the chain of command that governed access to sensitive information. She learned about the various security clearances, the different levels of access that existed within the royal household, and the specific protocols that govern medical information. Her investigation revealed that the Royal Medical Archive was under the direct supervision of a small team of specially cleared personnel. At the head of this team was Colonel James Morrison, a former military officer who had transitioned to royal security work 15 years earlier. Morrison was known throughout the palace as a man of absolute integrity and unwavering dedication to protocol. His staff of 3 assistants were similarly vetted and bound by confidentiality agreements that extended well beyond their employment with the royal household. The more Camilla learned about the security surrounding the medical archive, the more determined she became to find a way in. She began to map out the physical layout of the archive area, noting the locations of security cameras, the timing of staff rotations, and the procedures for accessing the restricted areas. Her years of experience navigating palace politics had taught her that every system, no matter how secure, had vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone with sufficient knowledge and determination. Her breakthrough came through an unexpected source. Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, a longtime palace staff member who worked in the administrative offices, mentioned during a casual conversation that she occasionally delivered documents to the archive area. The deliveries always required an escort, but Mrs. Whitfield had noticed that there were brief periods during shift changes when security was less vigilant. Armed with this information, Camilla began to formulate a plan. She would need to time her approach carefully, taking advantage of the brief window when security protocols were at their most relaxed. The archive area was typically quiet during the early afternoon hours, when most staff were focused on their regular duties and the changing of the guard created temporary gaps in surveillance. The key to her plan was legitimacy. Rather than attempting to sneak into the archive, she would approach it as if her presence there was entirely natural and authorized. Her status as queen consort would, she hoped, create enough uncertainty among security personnel to allow her access before anyone could verify her clearance level. She spent days rehearsing her approach, considering every possible scenario and preparing responses to likely challenges. She studied the names and faces of the archive security staff, learning their schedules and identifying which guards might be most likely to defer to her royal status without immediately checking protocols. The day she chose for her attempt was a Tuesday in late October, when much of the palace staff was focused on preparations for an upcoming state dinner. The increased activity provided perfect cover for her movements, as additional personnel throughout the building meant that her presence in unusual areas would be less likely to attract attention. She dressed carefully for the occasion, choosing an outfit that projected authority while remaining appropriate for moving through less formal areas of the palace. A tailored navy suit with subtle royal insignia would remind anyone she encountered of her status while not appearing overly formal for a supposedly routine administrative visit. Her heart rate increased as she made her way through the palace corridors toward the restricted area. Each step brought her closer to answers she had been seeking for weeks, but also closer to a potential confrontation that could have serious repercussions. The thought of Charles's confused expression during that dinner continued to drive her forward, overwhelming her concerns about protocol violations. The entrance to the restricted area was marked by a simple brass plaque that read "Authorized personnel only." Beyond the door lay a narrow corridor lined with additional security features, including card readers and surveillance cameras that monitored every movement. Camilla took a deep breath and pushed forward, knowing that hesitation at this point would only increase the likelihood of being challenged. Her plan began to unravel almost immediately. As she approached the main security checkpoint, she encountered Sergeant David Thompson, a guard she had not accounted for in her research. Thompson was a relatively new addition to the palace security team, having joined just 6 months earlier from a position with the Metropolitan Police. His lack of familiarity with royal protocols made him less likely to be swayed by her status, but his police background meant he was more likely to follow established procedures to the letter. The confrontation that would soon unfold between Queen Consort Camilla and the palace security system was about to test the very foundations of royal authority and institutional protocol in ways that neither side had anticipated. Sergeant David Thompson looked up from his security desk as Queen Consort Camilla approached the checkpoint. His training had prepared him for many scenarios, but a direct encounter with royalty attempting to access restricted areas had not been covered in his orientation sessions. The procedural manual was clear about access protocols, but it had not addressed what to do when those seeking access held positions of such elevated authority within the royal family itself. Thompson rose from his chair and offered a respectful bow. His voice carried the professional courtesy expected in royal interactions, but underneath lay an unmistakable note of uncertainty. "Your Majesty, good afternoon. I was not informed of any scheduled visits to this section today. May I ask the purpose of your visit?" Camilla had rehearsed this moment dozens of times, but facing the reality of the situation felt entirely different from her mental preparations. She drew upon years of public appearances and diplomatic encounters, projecting the calm authority that had served her well in countless challenging situations. "Sergeant Thompson, I need to review some medical documentation in the archive. This is a matter of some urgency regarding His Majesty's care." The guard's expression revealed his internal conflict. Protocol demanded that he verify authorization for any access to the restricted area, regardless of who was making the request. However, challenging a member of the royal family, particularly one as senior as the Queen Consort, carried its own risks. His police background had taught him to follow procedures strictly, but his new position in the royal household had also emphasized the importance of showing proper deference to the family he served. Thompson glanced at his computer screen, checking the access logs for any notation about approved visits. Finding none, he looked back at Camilla with growing discomfort. "Your Majesty, I show no authorization for archive access today. Standard protocol requires advance clearance from Sir Edmund Hartwell's office for any medical record reviews." The mention of Sir Edmund's name triggered a flash of frustration in Camilla's eyes. Her previous encounter with the chief medical administrator had left her with the clear impression that official channels would continue to obstruct her efforts to obtain the information she needed. The bureaucratic maze surrounding her husband's medical care had already proven itself impenetrable through conventional approaches. "Sergeant, I am the Queen Consort," she replied, her voice carrying a tone that had settled diplomatic disputes and commanded attention in international settings. "I should not need special permission to access information about my husband's health. Surely you understand that my concern for His Majesty's well-being takes precedence over administrative formalities." Thompson found himself in an impossible position. His training emphasized the absolute nature of security protocols, particularly regarding sensitive information that could affect national security if compromised. The medical records of the monarch were among the most highly classified documents in the kingdom, protected not just by institutional policy, but by considerations that extended to the stability of the government itself. Yet he was also acutely aware of the delicate nature of royal relationships and the potential consequences of alienating a senior member of the family. Stories circulated among palace staff about guards who had been transferred or dismissed after making decisions that upset royal sensibilities. The balance between duty and diplomacy had ended many promising careers within the royal household. "Your Majesty, I completely understand your concerns," Thompson said carefully, trying to find a path that might satisfy both security requirements and royal prerogatives. "However, I am bound by specific protocols that require written authorization for archive access. Perhaps I could contact Sir Edmund's office to expedite the clearance process." Camilla's patience, already strained by weeks of bureaucratic obstacles, began to fray. The image of Charles's confused expression continued to haunt her thoughts, driving her determination to overcome whatever barrier stood between her and the answers she sought. "I do not have time for more administrative delays. My husband's condition may be deteriorating while we waste time on paperwork and protocols." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Morrison, who had been alerted to the situation by the archive's surveillance system. Morrison's appearance immediately changed the dynamic of the encounter. Unlike Thompson, Morrison had extensive experience dealing with royal family members in sensitive situations. His military background had taught him the importance of clear command structures, but his years in royal service had also shown him the complex web of relationships and loyalties that govern palace life. Morrison approached the checkpoint with the measured pace of someone accustomed to diffusing tense situations. His greeting to Camilla was respectful but noticeably less deferential than Thompson's had been. Years of experience had taught him that effective security sometimes required saying no to very important people, and he had survived in his position precisely because he understood how to do so without causing unnecessary offense. "Your Majesty, Colonel Morrison," he introduced himself, though they had met on several previous occasions during security briefings. "I understand there may be some confusion about archive access procedures. Perhaps we could discuss this matter in my office, where we might find a solution that addresses your concerns while maintaining necessary security protocols." The suggestion of moving the conversation to a private setting appealed to Camilla, who had begun to realize that conducting this discussion in a corridor with multiple staff members present was not ideal for anyone involved. However, she also recognized that accepting Morrison's invitation might allow him to gain control of the situation and ultimately deny her the access she sought.
Colonel, I appreciate your diplomatic approach, but I am not interested in more discussions about protocols and procedures. I have been given evasive answers and bureaucratic delays for weeks, while my husband's condition remains a mystery to me.
I simply want to see his complete medical record so that I can understand what we are dealing with. Morrison's expression remained professionally neutral, but his mind was rapidly calculating the implications of the situation.
Allowing unauthorized access to the king's medical records, even by the queen consort, would represent a serious breach of established security protocols. However, forcibly preventing her access could create a crisis within the royal family that might have far-reaching consequences.
The colonel was also aware that their conversation was being monitored by security cameras, and that word of this encounter would inevitably reach other senior palace officials.
His handling of the situation would be scrutinized not just for its immediate effectiveness but for its long-term impact on palace security and royal family relationships. Your Majesty, I understand your frustration, but the medical archive contains information that extends beyond His Majesty's current health status. The records include historical data, genetic information, and psychiatric evaluations that are classified at the highest levels. Unauthorized disclosure could have implications that reach far beyond personal family concerns.
Morrison's mention of psychiatric evaluations struck Camilla like a physical blow. The possibility that Charles's recent episodes might be symptoms of a more serious mental health condition had been one of her deepest fears. But hearing it acknowledged, even indirectly by a security official, made it suddenly real and terrifying.
Her composure, maintained through years of public scrutiny and personal challenges, began to crack under the weight of her fears for her husband's condition. Are you telling me that there are psychiatric concerns in my husband's records? That there are mental health issues that have been hidden from me? The question hung in the air like an accusation, forcing Morrison to confront the ethical implications of his security role. He found himself walking a tightrope between his duty to protect classified information and his human understanding of a wife's desperate need to understand her husband's condition.
Thompson, still standing at a security desk, watched the exchange with growing anxiety. What had begun as a routine security challenge was evolving into a family crisis that seemed to involve information far more sensitive than he had initially realized.
His role as a junior guard had not prepared him for navigating the complex emotional and institutional dynamics now unfolding before him.
Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, Prince William had become aware of the situation through the security monitoring system that kept senior royals informed of unusual activities within the palace. His mother-in-law's attempt to access restricted medical information created a dilemma for him as well. As heir to the throne, he had a legitimate interest in his father's health status, but he also understood the importance of maintaining the security protocols that protected the family's most sensitive information. William's decision to involve himself in the situation would prove to be the catalyst that transformed a security incident into a full-scale family confrontation. His arrival at the archive area would shift the balance of power and create new complications that none of the participants had anticipated. The stage was now set for a confrontation that would test not just security protocols, but the very foundations of trust and transparency within the royal family.
The locked doors of the medical archive had become a symbol of the barriers that existed between family members, barriers that Camilla was determined to break down regardless of the consequences. As Morrison continued to explain the legal and security implications of archive access, Camilla's resolve only strengthened. The partial revelations about psychiatric evaluations had confirmed her worst fears while simultaneously providing her with new ammunition in her fight for transparency. She was no longer just seeking information about her husband's health. She was now fighting for the right to know the full truth about the man she had married and the challenges they might face together. The arrival of additional security personnel, alerted by the extended nature of the encounter, began to transform the corridor into something resembling a crime scene. The institutional machinery of palace security was slowly grinding into action, creating a momentum that would be difficult for anyone to control or redirect. What had started as one woman's quest for answers about her husband's health was becoming a test of the entire system of royal secrecy and institutional protection that had governed the monarchy for generations. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor as Prince William arrived at the archive area, his expression a careful mask of royal composure that barely concealed his inner turmoil. His presence immediately shifted the entire dynamic of the confrontation, transforming what had been a dispute between Camilla and the security staff into a complex family drama with institutional implications that reached to the very heart of the monarchy. William's relationship with his stepmother had evolved significantly over the years.
progressing from initial skepticism to grudging respect and, eventually, genuine affection. However, the current situation placed him in an impossible position. As heir to the throne, he had both personal and institutional interests in his father's health information. As a son, he understood Camilla's desperation to understand what was happening to her husband. As a future king, he recognized the critical importance of maintaining the security protocols that protected the royal family's most sensitive information. His arrival had been precipitated by a secure message from the Palace Security Center, alerting him to an unusual incident in the medical archive area. The notification had been deliberately vague, as such communications always were when transmitted through channels that might be monitored, but the location and parties involved had been sufficient to bring him there immediately. "Camilla," he said, his greeting carefully neutral but carrying undertones of concern and authority. "Colonel Morrison, I understand there may be some difficulty regarding archive access." Colonel Morrison felt a mixture of relief and increased pressure at William's arrival. The presence of the heir to the throne provided him with additional authority to maintain security protocols, but it also elevated the stakes of the situation considerably. Any decision he made would now be scrutinized not just by the current generation of royals, but by the future king himself. Camilla turned to face William, her emotions now clearly visible despite her attempts to maintain royal dignity. The strain of weeks of worry about Charles's condition, combined with the frustration of being blocked from accessing information about her own husband's health, had pushed her beyond her normal limits of composure. "William, thank goodness you're here," she began, her voice carrying both relief and desperation. "Perhaps you can help me understand why I am being prevented from seeing my husband's medical records." "They are keeping information from me about conditions that could be affecting his mind, his judgment, his very identity as a person." William's expression remained carefully controlled, but those who knew him well would have recognized the signs of deep internal conflict. His father's health had been a source of private concern for the entire family, but, like Camilla, he had received only carefully filtered information from the medical team. The possibility that there might be more serious underlying conditions than they had been told was deeply troubling. "What specific concerns do you have?" William asked, directing his question to both Camilla and Colonel Morrison. His diplomatic training had taught him to gather information before taking positions, especially in situations that involved competing loyalties and complex institutional considerations. Morrison seized the opportunity to present the security perspective with the support of a senior royal family member. "Your Royal Highness, the Queen Consort is seeking unrestricted access to His Majesty's complete medical archive. These records contain not just current health information but historical data, genetic analyses, and psychiatric evaluations that are classified at the highest security levels. Unauthorized access could compromise not just His Majesty's privacy, but the security of the entire royal family." The mention of psychiatric evaluations had the same impact on William that it had on Camilla. The possibility that his father might be experiencing mental health challenges that had been concealed from the family was both shocking and deeply concerning. His mind immediately went to the implications for the monarchy itself, the complex constitutional questions that would arise if the king's mental capacity became compromised. Sergeant Thompson, still stationed at his security desk, found himself witnessing a conversation that was far beyond his security clearance level. The discussion of psychiatric evaluations and genetic analyses involved information that he was not authorized to hear, yet his position as the checkpoint guard made it impossible for him to leave without abandoning his post. Camilla sensed an opportunity in William's apparent surprise at the revelation about psychiatric evaluations. "You see, William, even you were not told about these concerns. They have been keeping information from all of us while your father's condition may be deteriorating."
"I have witnessed episodes of confusion, memory lapses, and behavioral changes that suggest something far more serious than the normal aging process."
Dendon desires to be a victim in a true self that works in undefined fear.
The episodes she described were not the carefully sanitized reports that the medical team provided in their official briefings, but the raw, unfiltered observations of a wife who lived with and loved the man behind the crown. William found himself confronting the uncomfortable reality that his stepmother might have access to information about his father's condition that he himself had been denied. The possibility that the medical team's protective instincts had extended to shielding the heir to the throne from the full truth about the king's health was both personally hurtful and institutionally problematic. "Colonel Morrison," William said, his tone carrying new authority and determination, "I believe that both the Queen Consort and I, as heir to the throne, should have full access to information about His Majesty's health status. The security protocols, while important, cannot be allowed to prevent family members from understanding and addressing serious health concerns.
Morrison felt the ground shifting beneath his feet.
The arrival of the heir to the throne had fundamentally changed the power dynamics of the situation. While he could potentially continue to deny access to the queen consort based on established protocols, refusing both the current queen consort and the future king would be virtually impossible to justify or maintain.
However, Morrison was also aware that his ultimate responsibility was to the institution of the monarchy rather than to any individual member of the royal family. The protocols governing access to sensitive medical information had been established not just to protect privacy but to prevent the kind of information leaks that could destabilize the government and undermine public confidence in the royal family.
Your Royal Highness, I understand your position, but I must respectfully point out that these protocols were established by previous monarchs specifically to protect the institution. The medical records contain information that could be used to question His Majesty's fitness to rule, information that in the wrong hands could create constitutional crises.
The constitutional implications of the king's potential mental health issues hung in the air like a sword of Damocles. All parties present understood that they were not just discussing family medical concerns but potentially the stability of the British government itself.
The monarch's mental capacity was not just a personal health matter, but a question that could affect the entire constitutional system. William's response revealed the depth of his understanding of both his current position and his future responsibilities. Colonel, I appreciate your concerns about institutional security, but the greater risk lies in family members making decisions about the king's care and the future of the monarchy without complete information. If there are serious health concerns that could affect His Majesty's judgment or capacity, we need to know so that we can address them appropriately.
The logic of William's argument was compelling, but Morrison remained bound by protocols that had been established long before any of the current participants had assumed their roles. His position required him to protect the institution even from well-intentioned family members who might not fully understand the broader implications of the information they sought.
The standoff continued for several tense minutes, with neither side willing to yield ground on what they saw as fundamental principles. Preempt. Camilla's desperation to understand her husband's condition clashed with Morrison's duty to protect institutional security, while William found himself caught between his roles as son, heir, and future protector of the same institutional interests that were currently blocking his access to information. The resolution came from an unexpected source.
Dr. Patterson, the royal physician who had been providing the carefully sanitized medical updates, arrived at the archive area after being alerted to the situation by his staff. His appearance immediately changed the nature of the discussion from a confrontation over access protocols to a direct medical consultation. Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness. Doctor. Patterson began, his manner professionally calm but visibly strained. I understand there are concerns about His Majesty's medical records and recent health episodes. Perhaps we could address these concerns through a comprehensive medical briefing rather than through archive access. The doctor's arrival provided a potential path forward that might satisfy everyone's needs while avoiding the security breach that Morrison feared. However, it also forced Dr. Patterson to confront the ethical implications of his previous approach to medical communication with the royal family.
Camilla's response was immediate and sharp. Doctor, I have been asking for comprehensive information for weeks and have received nothing but vague reassurances in medical jargon.
If you are prepared to provide complete transparency now, including information about psychiatric evaluations and genetic concerns, then perhaps we can resolve this situation. But I will not accept any more evasive answers or partial disclosures. The confrontation had reached a critical juncture where all parties would be forced to choose between competing loyalties and responsibilities.
The locked doors of the medical archive had become a symbol of the broader tensions between transparency and security, between family relationships and institutional protocols, between personal needs and constitutional responsibilities. The outcome would not just determine whether Camilla gained access to her husband's medical records, but would establish precedents for how the royal family would handle sensitive information in the future.
The institutional machinery that had protected royal secrets for generations was being challenged by the most basic human need, a wife's desire to understand and help her husband. As the final confrontation unfolded, all participants understood that they were not just resolving a security incident but potentially reshaping the relationship between the royal family and the institutions that served them.
The guard who had blocked Camilla at the archive entrance had become witness to a moment that would redefine royal transparency for generations to come.